Hello everybody and welcome to this video in which I can finally talk about Final Fantasy VIII. Finally. It has been a long time coming. Square Enix has found the code or whatever they needed to do to give us a HD remaster of this game, and they've pushed it out. And after many years of it not really being available on any modern platforms, it is now there. And that is a great thing because Final Fantasy VIII is my favourite, if not my absolute favourite Final Fantasy. It is right up there. It holds a very special place in my heart. I do love the series as a whole, and there aren't too many games that I have too many negative things to say about in this series. And, you know, I love Final Fantasy X, I love 12, I love 4, 6, 1, 3, 14. I love them all, really. But Final Fantasy VIII certainly has a special spot in my heart. So I wanted to do this video because I finally had a chance to replay it. It's been quite a few years since I last got a chance to play through this. I've played it through about 6 or 7 times back when it was on the PlayStation, and yeah, it's a game I pretty much memorized by heart. So there's nothing surprising in there, of course, but it's been good to be able to replay it. And as you can see from the graphics and stuff, it looks pretty nice in HD. They've done a good job. .emu is the developer that handled this port, and they've done a really good job with it. It does look good. But I'm not here to talk about that. I wanted to talk about some of the themes of Final Fantasy VIII, because I think one of the things that really determines which is your favorite Final Fantasy is which Final Fantasy has a narrative or themes that really resonate with you, and they all cover very different topics. So Final Fantasy X was a really intense look at the role of religion within a society and how that can be corrupted. Final Fantasy XII is a look at imperialism and the broader political dynamics between nations. Final Fantasy I is this kind of mini essay on determinism. Final Fantasy IV has that great redemption story arc within it. Final Fantasy VI has that discussion around the nature of madness with Kefka as the villain and so on. So they all have a very different set of themes to them. And Final Fantasy VIII really resonated with me because it is very existentialist in nature, and I studied existentialism a lot back at university. You know, I still read books about it today, so it's a theme that really resonates with me, and I think that's why I do like Final Fantasy VIII so much. So, fair warning, this video will have spoilers, very big spoilers. I can't really talk about the themes of this game without giving you those. This is an old game, of course, so I think it's fair to expect that people probably have played it. Otherwise, you know, I would never be able to talk about games. Nobody would ever be able to talk about games to this kind of depth. So, there are spoilers. If you haven't played Final Fantasy VIII yet and you've been waiting for this release to finally play it or whatever, and you don't want the narrative spoiled, come back to this video afterwards if you want. But yeah, I'm giving you fair warning that there is spoilers in this one. I don't want anybody yelling at me because I haven't given them fair warning. There are spoilers. So as I said, Final Fantasy VIII is about existentialism. It's a very existentialist story, and my favourite quote on existentialism comes from one of the real leading philosophers in the subject, Jean-Paul Sartre, who said or wrote, "No doctrine is more optimistic than existentialism, since it declares that man's destiny lies within himself." That is really to the core of what existentialism is. It's a philosophical theory which really emphasizes the existence of a person as a free and responsible agent determining their own future, their own destiny through acts of will. It's kind of the opposite, I guess, philosophy to determinism, which is basically saying that everybody's on this kind of set path through life, through the cosmos, and events are kind of set in stone before they happen. So those are kind of the two alternative philosophies that are at play here. Existentialism, though, is the one that I do feel for Final Fantasy VIII really kind of promotes and does a really good job of it. And it does so through what is basically called the time compression, which is spelt in the game wrong to create an accent, but it's basically time compression. Now, time compression is what the ultimate end boss of the game of Final Fantasy VIII is looking to do, which is she's looking to cast this amazingly powerful spell that will compress all of time into a single point, a singularity, basically like the Big Bang, but of time. And, you know, everything is kind of crunched. So she casts the spell at a certain point, and then time starts to get compressed and weird things start to happen, and all the characters start to see themselves, you know, repeating, and there's the crossovers in timelines and all that kind of stuff, which is very confusing the first time you play it through, it must be said. It actually takes a couple of plays through Final Fantasy VIII to really get a sense of how that story is playing out, and I think that's part of the reason that this was a fairly controversial game when it first came out. It deals with some pretty heavy stuff in relatively limited numbers of words, so you need to play it through a couple of times to really start to piece together what it's actually saying. So again, fair warning, if you're still listening to this and haven't actually turned it off because of the concern about spoilers, if this is the first time you're playing it through, prepare to play it through at least a couple more times to really get a sense for it. But what does that time compression actually mean? What does it mean to the narrative? What does it mean to the characters? What does it mean to what the game is saying? And I guess that's where the existentialism line comes in. It's the idea of time compression is that at the end of the time compression, there is no future. There is no future because everything is confined into a single, you know, fraction of a moment of time. Once everything's compressed that far, there's no horizon, there's no next step to take, there's no future to look forward to. What does that mean? That's quite a dark thought, really. It's quite a scary thing to think about. And if there is no future, what is the real purpose in life? What happens? Where does humanity go? What is there to look forward to? What is there to fight for? What is there to live for, really? What is the purpose of life if there is no future? If there is no time, if there is no ability to control your destiny to work towards a future, what happens? And that's where Final Fantasy, that's the question, that's the great question that Final Fantasy VIII really asks you. And of course, in the game, you're naturally fighting against the person that's trying to create the time compression. Therefore, the game's making the argument that this is a inherently bad thing, that people should have a future, that there should be this time horizon to look forward to work towards, and that's a core part of humanity. That's a core part of what makes a person a person. So that's where the game kind of comes from, I think, with this, it kind of lands in this argument. So within that, there's plenty of romance and there's tragedy and all kinds of stuff as you would expect from a Final Fantasy game. This is a bloated game. The original release was something like 4 discs, I think. 4 discs on PlayStation 1, which was a lot. It would take you, I don't know, it'd take you a solid 80 hours, I guess, to work through it the first time around. So there's a lot to the game, and some of those themes are kind of lost, I guess, but it keeps coming back to this point. It keeps coming back to this existentialist argument about, is there a future for people? Interestingly, the game also opens up the deterministic argument, I guess, that there is an element of fate to existence, and that you're always working towards something which has kind of been predefined ahead of time. Because these characters, the 6 heroes that you have control of, they're all kind of created, and they're created through history, through time crossing and all that kind of science fiction stuff that really can do your head in if you actually start to think about it. But all of these heroes are created with the express purpose of defeating this ultimate evil, which is looking to compress time right down. So they are basically weapons. They are weaponized humans, which in itself brings up a whole bunch of other kind of more here and now themes about, you know, child soldiers. They are basically child soldiers. They're kind of created, and the kind of moral and ethical considerations around that as well, and whether, you know, the fact that they're orphans and the way that they're used also creates, you know, a bit of conversation, I guess, about how society looks at the disadvantaged, being the orphans, and how it tends to treat them. So there are those kinds of conversations in there as well. But the ultimate point is that these characters were all destined to prevent the end boss from narrowing time down to a single point. So there is that angle as well, which is very deterministic. So the game doesn't really have any specific answers about the philosophies that it's putting forward. It's more just a series of questions and thought bubbles for you to really think about as you play along. And again, I think that's part of the reason that Final Fantasy VIII was a game that, on original release, didn't necessarily resonate as well as some of the others. There are some mechanical issues and stuff as well, which I'll talk about in my written review on digitallydownloaded.net. But in terms of the actual storytelling and the themes, I think it left people a little bit cold because it didn't really have answers. Final Fantasy VII, 9, 10, 12, they all have quite definitive answers to them. So did the ones beforehand, 6 and 4 and whatever. They all had quite definitive answers. They all wrapped things up and then just left things. But this game really doesn't. This game really doesn't do that. It has an ending. The big boss in the end is kind of defeated, and time is restored to normal, and everybody is therefore happy. Brunoa, comes out of time to save Squall, who's nearly lost to time, and that couple. You can only assume that they end up having a happy life together afterwards. So it has, the story itself has narrative answers, but the themes aren't really answered, they're questioned. And that, of course, goes to existentialism, because there isn't really an answer. This is all just a whole bunch of thought bubble stuff, and people sit one way or another and argue for that position and so on. So that's why I like it. It's because it isn't clean. It's not an easily answered thing. It's not like a mathematical equation. It's just something to think about. And it's not even something that necessarily has a practical application in the real world. It's more something that you're just meant to internalize, and it helps you to, I guess, look at the world in a different way, or give you a particular perspective on the meaning of life for you as such, because ultimately that is what existentialism's there for. It's to address the topic of the meaning of life. So yeah, this game is very good at all of that. It's a very interesting title. It's well worth playing today. To this day, the story it's telling is very relevant and very well told. Like I said, it's a little bit minimalist in terms of the raw text it uses. JRPGs these days tend to be wordier, but it gets its job done. It does have that depth, and it's quite interesting at all times. It's never a game that gets dull unless you find that combat system to be a little bit less than interesting. On a final note, I'd like to mention the summons, which are kind of a highlight of Final Fantasy VIII, because they're so big and impressive. And even today, the attack animations, which are really extended, they go for a long time. They're full cutscenes. As you can see, you're seeing one right there in front of you with Shiva doing her summon spell. These are extended, and that's because these summons are very core to the narrative and the theme of Final Fantasy VIII. Because in using them, they cause the human soldiers, the child soldiers here, they cause them a kind of mental, they cause them to lose, to start forgetting memories, to start to forget their place in the world. They actually cause a kind of brain damage as such in using them. They're important weapons of war, and that's why they're encouraged to use them, and that's why the whole garden where they start their story actually actively encourages students to use these things. But they're not good for the users. They're not good for their state of being or their sense of self, because in losing their memories, they actually lose a great deal of sense of self. They don't know who they are anymore. At the start, we don't know too much about Squall, and it's not just because he's this quiet protagonist. It's not just because he's this guy that is a little bit hostile and angsty. It's not just because he's like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, only even quieter. It's because he actually doesn't know who he is. He's lost a lot of his sense of self. And this game really makes that strong point that memories and nostalgia is an important part of that sense of self. And again, that's kind of goes to the story or the narrative angle that time is important to humanity. Because without time, without that past, present and future, without having that continuity of experience and future, who are you? What are you? Are you human? How can you be human without that kind of experience? This game really asks those kinds of questions about the nature of humanity really being wrapped up not just in who we are at any moment in time, but actually who we are in the past and who we will be in the future. And that game, it's a wonderful theme, as I'm probably over enthusiastically saying through this microphone. And I don't know how this is going to sound on hearing it back, probably too enthusiastic. But I love Final Fantasy VIII. I think it's an amazing game. I think that I'm so glad that it's now there and Square Enix can release it over and over and over again going forward, as I'm sure they will. We'll have it on every platform in the future now. And it's a good thing. This game is a very important work of art with very strong themes and a lot that you can really analyze and pull out of it. What I've said here is just one take you can take on this game. There are so many different philosophies that you could apply to it depending on what your interest is and where your knowledge is and what you like to think about. So give this game a go. If you haven't played it, I've probably just ruined 90% of the plot for you, and if you're still listening. But if you have played it a long time ago and you feel like it's and it didn't click with you then, please try it again. Give it another go. It may well resonate more strongly with you this time, now that you're a little bit older, because this game came out a long time ago now. Now that you're a little bit older, now that you've got a little bit more life experience in there, maybe these themes are a little bit more resonant with you this time around. And it looks good. The HD, the port quality is really good from what I can tell. I've played enough of it to do a review, and I have got absolutely no issues with it. I haven't finished the game again because, like I said, it's a long one, but you know, I've played it 6 or 7 times. I know how this game finishes, and I'm quite content with the quality of the port from what I have played. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in for this long-winded video. I hope it was interesting. I hope it gave you something to think about Final Fantasy VIII, maybe a different angle or whatever. Do let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences with this game and what you think about it as well. Please have a read of my review on digitallydownloaded.net as well. It'll go into the more mechanical side of the game. Otherwise, please do back me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos and my thought bubbles that I like to throw out from time to time. And I don't know what else I've got really to say. Be sure to tune in for the next video. I've got another one coming soon enough. And then, yeah, stay tuned for my coverage of Tokyo Game Show, which I will be in about a week now. It's coming up close, so I will be there, so look forward to that coverage as well. Thanks very much for watching, and we will see you at the next video.